So this notion, this sense that people live with of being a separate individual, separate from others, separate from life, a sense of me versus the world, or some of this dynamic can really be a huge contributor to a sense of suffering. It doesn't always beget that sense of suffering, but when that separation is sort of where one's identity lies and their soul experience, and when it becomes alienating or dividing, and it divorces them from their remembrance or their sense of connectivity with the whole, it can greatly produce suffering. But I also think that suffering doesn't just stem from that sense of separation. Well, I wouldn't necessarily use those words, although what I would say is a great contributor to suffering is related to that sense of separation. One of I think the biggest contributors is a sense that things should be other than they are. So some sense of feeling like oneself as an individual needs to be different, some feeling that the situation that one finds himself in needs to be different, that another person they're relating to needs to be different, or just that a person really wants the situation or themselves or the other to be different, seems to be the real sticking point that gets suffering going. It's not necessarily a sense of being an individual and in time and space or in relationship or that, unless that becomes one's sole sense of self that becomes kind of contracted and isolated. But just to have, a sense of being an individual and perhaps with that some sense of being an expression of life itself, which is more of a sense of wholeness or a sense of spirit, as well as being a human individual, that doesn't necessarily beget suffering, as much as I think that feeling that things should be different than they are, or people. Well, I think the role of emotions in establishing that sense of separate self is definitely present. I mean, even from a really young age, we hardly just learn the word I without the rest of the sentence. I am happy, I am sad, I am hungry. All of these ways of communicating. Like very quickly, the emotion is paired with the sense of I, and I think that very quickly also that develops into the felt state of whatever finishes the sentence. I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm whatever. It kind of can define one's whole sense of self or the I experience. So certainly a way of understanding emotions in a way that science is showing to be less personal is it can be tremendous in beginning to loosen that strong association between the emotional state and the sense of self. And I think that's exciting. It's a really exciting time in this way of what's being discovered. Well, I'm not sure how what I'd like to share ties into this scientific findings, which I'm not very familiar with at this point. But what I'd like to share is, as a person with a background in Chinese medicine, which is a very much an energetically based medicine, there's ways that they describe given emotions in terms of how energy is moving in the body. Like anger would be an outward expression of stuck qi that that explodes, but that same stuck energy or stagnating energy that begins to implode can turn into depression. And maybe there's something in between where it just kind of smolders as like a frustration or irritation before it actually explodes and is released. So there's the exploding and the imploding ways that are spoken about, for example, with these particular emotions, and there's ways that energetic descriptions are given to all of the emotions and of how energy moves in the body and how it's felt. And so often I'll kind of resource that history of mine, that's body of knowledge of mine from Chinese medicine. So when I'm talking to people about an emotion that they're in the grips of that maybe is causing them a sense of tremendous suffering, somewhere just instinctively now it lives in me, just the sense as I'm hearing them speak, sort of almost the energetic imprint of where they're speaking from or what they're describing, and just from my years of being steeped in that medicine or some exposure to some of the like Qigong or Tai Chi or some of these things, there's a way that my system now kind of knows a little bit better how to dance with these and how to maybe to give insight into describing these emotions as energies and teaching people to be able to observe emotions in as energetic expressions in the body, or even to be able to observe thoughts as energies that are perhaps very busy in the space of the head, and to get a sense of who and what they are that's able to be aware of these and to observe. And the very sense of that which is looking at these energies is not defined by the energies, but tends to have a transmission of a soft kind of steady attention that can transmit a sense of stillness when one is really being very intimate with sensing those energies in the body and offering one's attention to those energies. There can be a way in which just placing one's attention on, does that energy feel, what's it feel like, and not that you necessarily need this whole inner dialogue, but it can be a kind of exploring, where do you feel it, where do you feel that emotion, how is it presenting, is it warm, is it, cool, is it moving upward, is it contracting in on itself, and just, not that you have to ask all these questions, but this is the kind of attitude of being curious and really holding the emotion in your attention, not just directing your attention there, but really holding it in your attention seems to transmit this sense of steady, attentive presence. And this seems to be the nature of separate self, like even as the ego, begins to form and the sense of me, the toddler, it wants all the attention, and it responds to the attention, and it kind of can be fed by that attention and nurtured by that attention. And it's almost the same with emotions. They seem to really respond when attention is given, and they're really almost, if to personify them, they feel that they're seen and that they're allowed to be and express and unfold and unwind into that space of loving attention. Well, often when the sense of energies that may feel as though they're moving toward a liberated state, like as they're allowed into that space of awareness, and they begin to kind of harmonize in that space of attention. It's like something that may feel contracted or very much formed as like, this is the energy of, defensiveness or whatever it might be, guardedness. And as it begins to not be told that something's wrong, not be pushed away, but actually be turned toward and be met with curiosity and compassion, it can tend to begin to be informed by that space and unwind. And when that happens, a whole sense of like central experience that's kind of constellating around that energetic pattern kind of unwinds into this space of being. And so often one's whole sense of self kind of feels like it's relaxed into aware space or just simply being. And so there can often be the experience of less of a sense of central self, that's a sense of subject that's relating to this object of experience that really has its attention, maybe first as a relationship of suffering and not allowing or really preferring it to be different. And then maybe when that preference is allowed and the emotions allowed, then when that sense of one's object of perception relaxes, even the sense of subject often relaxes, because it's not finding its relation, relating to life in that subject-object orientation. Having said that, most people will report that that sense of central self may reconstitute in another situation where there might be an emotion that's really grabbing their attention. But the more that one begins to sense that spacious awareness that's being offered to the emotion is not only like a function or sort of a attitude that can be tried on, or like a dynamic that can be stepped into, but actually a natural expression of one's being, that maybe I am this aware space. And when that sense of subject begins to dissolve into this aware space, one may have the lived experience of, oh, this feels quite natural. I feel quite at home in this. Then there can be more of a shift of identity that occurs out of a sense of I'm the subject relating to all of these phenomena, and more of a sense of self as awareness, or almost so just this whole context of life in which all of life is arising and within and unfolding and appearing as. So that can be sort of the initial sense of almost like a reinvestment of energy out of the identity as subject or separate self or I or ego, and almost like a relinquishment of that investment of energy, and it kind of opens perhaps into kind of liberating those funds or investments. And yet, interestingly enough, a sense of self can take up residence in even there. There can be a sense of, oh, I'm this expanded space, or I'm that which is aware of all things. And that can be a much more subtle duality, a sense not so much of the duality of I, subject, and emotion object, or thought object, or other person as something separate than myself, but a sense of I'm awareness, and then there's everything I'm aware of. And that's like a more subtle duality. But as that willingness to just totally allow the arising of all objects of experience becomes more innate and begins to come online and really function and flower, there can be just a sense of that aware, the one that's aware, and that which is being awared, or that which one is aware of, that whole construct begins to soften, and the whole construct of duality becomes, you could say, much simpler. this is such an exciting time in history, and maybe every point in history people are saying that. I don't know. But one thing that I find really exciting is all these developments, like we were speaking earlier about these advancements in science and in understanding emotion. And there's all kinds of things that are becoming known, and whole fields that are coming into being, you know, of how to relate to trauma, or how to look into the development of the whole nervous system, you know, as it moves from, you know, infancy into adulthood, and how the nervous system responds in different situations, and I mean, infinite more things that I'm not even mentioning. But it's a really exciting time, especially like development of the brain and the whole things that we're learning, and so it seems to be that a lot is happening and coming forward. And one thing that is being given voice to here in this conference is not just about science in the traditional ways that we think of science, but science as it's beginning to merge into this, you know, somatic experience, whether it be emotions or nervous system or physicality, or all the ways that our emotional history can be found to have traces in the body. And so I'm excited that that's being given voice to, kind of all in one concentrated week and in dialogue here. And I think that on the heels of all of this, there's a way in which spirituality is kind of evolving to reflect what's happening in the scientific community and in our culture, and in all the influences that have come from the East to the West, whether it be, you know, martial arts or yoga or all of these things. There's much greater awareness, I believe, now in the West, and more so coming, about the relationship of the body in the whole mix of spirituality, and this way that the body can just be this tremendous gateways into different aspects of our nature, whether it be, you know, a sense of clarity, or a sense of connection, or a sense of stillness, or whatever it might be. The body is just tremendously vital as an ally in one's spiritual search. So yes, I definitely see people's approach to spirituality evolving in this way to reflect this more conscious relationship with our physical nature. And it makes so much sense, because in this Western culture that has been so well served through the brilliance of mind, and, you know, the development in the realms of thought and psychology, science, technology, it only makes sense that when that is really explored quite fully, that both the benefits and the downsides of that focus become more well known, and that it's no wonder that there's also now this counterbalance movement happening, it feels like, to really explore the body and what's below this region of the mind. And I think it really makes sense, because people have this instinctual sense that we're a whole being, and to put so much emphasis on one area, let's say the realm of thought, just somehow instinctively feels out of balance. So I feel that these are some factors, but also I think that being more grounded in the physical may be perhaps a more feminine attribute coming forward, and I don't mention that just as a woman, but I see this in males and females, some sense of this that complements that male clear clarity of mind, of thought, of being able to map out territories and see big pictures and present wonderful models to the world. And it feels like a great complement to that is, you know, how is that sensed in how we move in the world, and how do those maps translate into our energetics and you know, how we relate to life, and that feels like a very, it somehow feels feminine to me, because women are so in touch with, you know, the creative force, and how that expresses in this world in form. You know, they give birth to form, and I think there's perhaps more women teachers in the spiritual arenas now, and I think that voice and that expression is really being added to the mix, and so that's exciting for me too. Not just because I'm a woman, but because this is all of our nature, to have these both feminine and masculine principles, and I think maybe perhaps it's true that without some representation of both, people sense some kind of imbalance, or something that seeks to be satisfied in a more whole way. So often I think it's more accessible for people to understand duality when they're holding the opposites, you know, right, wrong, good, bad, inside, outside, me, you, north, south, whatever it might be. That this realm of opposites can seem like, oh, I kind of get how the mind structures itself around opposites, and communication is structured around opposites, and there's a kind of real accessible sense to this nature of duality. I think what is more subtle is how duality doesn't just live in the world of form, in the forms of black and white, or good or bad, or right and wrong. Duality also can subtly be applied to this sense of the formless and the form, or the very source and spirit from that animates us, and its expression, and that's its own kind of duality, and I feel that there's a way that yoga or martial arts, for example, we're talking about Eastern influences, can really not only teach us about the body and how it moves and expresses in this world of form, but this sense of this animating principle that feels as though it comes from some deep mystery of being that is prior to form. Can't quite touch the very source from which this animating principle arises to give life to these forms and expressions, or these abilities to name things, or call something black or white. But there is something that feels like it's prior to all form. It's, you know, it's much like you can hold black in one hand and white in the other, but that which knows them both, which is looking at them, is prior to both. And that which is looking, that which is prior, that which knows them, is a mysterious thing. And somehow it feels like the transmission of some of these traditions that have been offered from the East, the yoga or martial arts or Oriental thought in general, feels like it gives some voice to that. Somehow it transmits that, even if you can't quite grasp it, can't quite give it a form, but somehow it's animated. Those teachings are animated with that principle, and we feel it, and something resonates with that within us. And that's, to me, where spirituality gets very, very interesting. Offering one's curiosity and intention and absolute offering of oneself to that mystery.